All right. Me and John Weeks are back and we're reading again. And we're going to commentary on In the Beginning. How are you doing, brother?
I'm doing great. How are you, Tommy?
I'm good. It was like last week, I think it was last Friday on Provoked. Scott Horton goes, the show. It was like that was the intro.
And then play the music.
Right. It was funny. I was like, Scott's such a goofball.
He's gotten real good queuing up that intro music and graphics.
Yeah. Yeah, I know there for early on there were a few people like complaining that the intro music was too loud. And and when I listened to it it was like you were getting a little bit of that mic crack, because the speaker cracking or something like that. And it seems like they've gotten all the sound, all the bugs out, as far as sound goes though. They sound great.
Sounds really good. And I love that opening. It's a
Yeah.
banger,
Yeah, it's cool.
especially when it's like showing provoked in all different fonts.
Yeah.
Really amps me up for the show.
Yeah. And then Daryl Cooper's all laid back. He's just kind of like, yeah. You expect a mosh pit to break out, and Daryl Cooper's just like, yeah. All right. Well, let's dig into In the Beginning. We're this is actually kind of one of the shorter chapters, but with it with the next chapter being the length that is, which is about average length, it's just not going to work out to combine two of them together. So we're just going to run through this and bullshit and make fun of this guy because apparently he enjoys it when people make fun of him. Um, that's what he was saying in the last one anyway. Like
He's
humor
a real
is,
masochist,
yeah,
this guy.
yeah. He he's something. He's something to behold. You see all my tabs up here of stuff I'm going to do in the future. Ignore the man behind the curtain. Um, but all right. In the beginning, In the beginning, the incoming organizer must establish his identity, or, putting it another way, get his license to operate. He must have a reason for being there, a reason acceptable to the people. Any stranger is suspect. Who's the cat? I love the slang. What's he asking all those questions for? Is he really the cops or the FBI? What's his bag? What's he really after? What's in it for him? Who's he working for? He's a Russian operative. He's Mossad. Anyway, the answers to these questions must be acceptable in terms of the experience of the community. If the organizer begins with an affirmation of his love for people, he promptly turns everyone off. If, on the other hand, he begins with a denunciation of exploiting employers, slum landlords, police shakedowns, gouging merchants, he is inside their experience and they accept him. People can make judgments only on the basis of their own experiences. And the question in their mind is, if we were in the organizer's position, would we do what he is doing? And if so, why? Until they have an answer that is at least somewhat acceptable, they find it difficult to understand and accept the organizer. His acceptance as an organizer depends on his success in convincing key people and many others. First, that he is on their side, and second, that he has ideas and knows how to fight to change things, that he's not one of these guys doing his thing, that he's a winner. Otherwise, who needs him? All his presence means is that the census changes from 225,000 to 225 and 1,000, or 225,001. That's how I should have said that. I'm not a retard at all. It is not enough to persuade them of your competence, talents, and courage. They must have faith in your ability and courage. They must believe in your capacity, not just to provide the opportunity for action, power, change, adventure, a piece of the drama of life, but to give a very definite promise, almost an assurance of victory. They must also have faith in your courage to fight the oppressive establishment, courage that they too will begin to get once they have the protective armor of a power organization. Put on the armor of God. But don't have during the first lonely steps forward. Love and faith are not common companions. Yeah. Can you just come out and like say, I am the Antichrist? It's like love and faith are not common companions.
And I was thinking, even the title, In the Beginning, has a very religious, biblical vibe.
Well, he's playing with that. He's playing with that language the entire book. And it instigates me to make like little comments about it because I see it everywhere. It's like my wife and I have been watching this show, Mr. Mercedes. I think it came out like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, but we sat down to watch it because she had wanted to watch it and we had started it like, I don't know, 5, 6 months ago, and then we never finished it. So we were finishing it. And there was this one scene in I think it was in season 2 where the serial killer says, they had to die so I could live. And I was like, that is so obvious, like a play on Christianity, just like reversing it. And I mean, obvious, it's a Stephen King, story. So it was like, it wasn't surprising at all. But then after he said that, I kept seeing the theme pop up in different ways. And it was like, oh, this is just antagonistic towards Christianity, intentionally antagonistic towards Christianity. And I found it so interesting that that was the angle he wanted to take all through that second season.
So that's funny. I'm not familiar with that work at all, but I've read a decent amount of Stephen King books and seen some of the film and TV adaptations. And I have noticed that like Christian imagery or gestures, and I never experienced it as antagonistic, but I always just sort of thought, well, yeah, that's so dominant, like in the culture, like that narrative, and it's so
Mhm.
fundamental in our civilization that you'd be like drawing from that for other stories. um that was years ago. I thought that. Now, yeah, I tend to see the antagonism more.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of funny. You got me into this um transcendental argument of God.
Yeah.
And I've been digging into that and just loving it. Um
It's a deep rabbit hole, man.
it's great because I'm really into, especially for like doing research for the book I'm working on, I'm really into the philosophy.
Mm,
And it's so cool to see these guys like interacting with that same philosophy, but
mhm,
not from the establishment academic perspective. So
mhm.
it's really helping me to understand the philosophy better.
Oh, okay.
And one thing that I had a lot of thoughts. Like one thought I had was, um, oh, it's cool how they're interacting with a lot of the sort of paradoxes and inconsistencies that the sincere philosophers in the like postmodern or post-postmodern or post-realist um, discourse or interacting with, but then they're bringing in God,
Hmm.
and they're kind of arguing that look, like the atheists, like the really smart atheists, they're basically building the same system that we have, just not with God.
Hmm.
And I think about that with like somebody like the French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan, who has this threefold structure of the human psyche, the imaginary, the symbolic, and the real. And I was like, oh, that's kind of just like the Trinity, but without God.
Right.
And it was um, the first person who sort of pointed this out to me through their work was the conservative commentator Matt Walsh,
Mhm.
where he's like, the people who hate Christianity, they still have to like riff off of Christianity,
Yeah.
like saying they're a Satanist. Well, that's like kind of like the villain or the antagonist
Mm.
in this framework. You're just taking that guy. Like that's our guy. And you're taking him. And so it's funny to see how Saul Alinsky's doing it. um, where yeah, he's being antagonistic toward it, but it's almost like his entire project is dependent on it.
Yeah.
That's really interesting to see.
Well, you know why that is, don't you? Because Christianity defeated all the other gods. So that was a big deal. Like if you read like St. Paul in his epistles when he writes to like the Romans or Corinthians or Ephesus, or you read the Gospel of John, their entire framework, the way that they are framing their argumentation is they are arguing against the pagans of Greek. So at that time, when all these things were happening, when they were going around and they were preaching to Rome, Greek was a designated term for pagans. It wasn't like a region, it was a designated term for pagans. Everybody else was considered Roman. The Greeks were the pagan, um, like kind of like the pagan segment of the population. And so a lot of their argumentation is against the Greeks and their pagan worship and their gods, right? So when you're reading it, if you're reading it from that framework, like this is a philosophical work in order to dismantle and dismember the the gods of the pagans, it actually like hits you a little bit different with the language that they're using and then the way that they're arguing. So, and I got this from Father Stephen DeYoung, who's done a lot of great work on this. Um, not not least of which is his podcast, which I think I bring up almost every podcast we do, Lord of Spirits. He talks a lot about that stuff. He gets real deep into that stuff and really understands the old world religions and how Christianity was fighting against those religions. And part of the Christian ethos was always to go out into the world and retake from the pagan gods what is rightfully the one true God, right? And so to retake the earth for the one true God away from the pagan gods, that was always like part of the ethos of Christianity. So like you still have places, I think Mount Sinai, I think I read a while back, still has a lot of pagan like like uh what do you call them? Altars on the side of the mountain, but they've been blessed by Christians and there's a lot of like Christian iconography like decorating these pagan altars, right? Like I think it was like the I want to say it was the altar of Zeus is like within an Orthodox Christian church has been taken is like basically was taken by the Orthodox Christians and just they built a church around it. You know, it's just
That's awesome.
yeah, like like part of the whole ethos of Christianity is to retake the earth from the demonic and the satanic. Like there's this meme that went around for a while and it had I don't know if you know who Jonathan Pajot is, but he does this show
I do
called
not.
he does a show called The Symbolic World. He's an Orthodox Christian. He got real famous because he would do lectures with Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson would bring him on tour with him, and he's an iconographer for the Orthodox Church. And so he's really into the symbolism around like religion and orthodoxy. And there was this meme where it had Jordan Peterson and it said how it started, and it was Jordan Peterson saying clean your room, and then it was like how it's going, and it was Jonathan Pajot saying, "Of course Zeus exists." Yeah. So so it's like there's this kind of like this idea within the Orthodox Christian ethos, and it comes from the Old Testament that the gods of the I think it's in Psalms, and it says the gods of the nations are demons. And it's small g gods. It's not like capital G. It's small g gods. It says the gods of the nations are demons. And so, and then there's all this talk in the Old Testament about the council of gods, right? And when God is talking about what to do with Adam and Eve, he's talking like, what are we going to do? Because they're going to try to be like us, right? And so this is like the whole idea about in the Orthodox tradition is he was talking to angels and angelic beings that he gave like kingship over the nations of the world. And so and these angels then fell from grace because they were seeking out the worship of humanity instead of pointing to God to for humans to worship capital G God. You know, so there's this whole like ethos behind the gods and like Zeus and Thor that all intermingles within the Christian ethos, which is why when I told you was last week or week before, whenever it was, that the like the modern day interpretations of Norse mythology were all written by Christians is because they viewed themselves as fighting these entities. Like these entities were in the Christian mindset, these entities truly exist. Like they weren't worshiping nobodies. They weren't worshiping nothing. There was something that they were worshiping. What they were worshiping wasn't the true God. They were worshiping an idol that was inhabited by a demon or a false god, however you want to see it. So the mocking way that the Christians rewrote Norse mythology was kind of kind of like a slap in the face to the demons.
My my wife and I have this like disagreement about the place of the television when you're trying to go to sleep.
Mm,
Personally, I've always liked to go to sleep with just quiet,
mm,
but she needs something on in the background. But I can't sleep if there's like a scripted drama or comedy on. So the compromise has always been either we listen to like rain or snowstorms, or we listen to like a History Channel type show.
yeah.
So there's been times where the History Channel or whatever is just on, and I'm like half awake, maybe I've had a little bit to drink, and I'm like kind of like sort of paying attention. And there's one episode about how Christianity became dominant in the Roman Empire. And I'd like sort of like for a few nights in a row or a few weeks in a row, they kept replaying the same episode. I keep like half listening to it. And I was like, wow, like I kind of know this story, but it's never really hit me like how crazy this story is.
Oh yeah.
That Christianity went from being like so outlawed that they would torture and kill you, and like Nero would like light Christians on fire to light his parties. Went
Hmm.
from that to being like decriminalized to being like, oh, now it's the state religion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Constantine's a Christian now. Like, so-
like that's like, and that Christians went from uh, worshiping in secret in the sewers to standing in these beautiful pagan temples that are
mhm.
now conquered by
Yeah.
Christianity. Like that's a kick-ass story.
Yeah.
And so like what's funny is like the the atheists I know, well they tend to dismiss religion as it's just like a scam. Um it's just like public relations for the state,
Yeah.
you
It's a
know.
it's multi-level marketing or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just multi-level marketing. And it's like, okay, if you think it's not true, that's one thing. But you can't like behold like this story and be like impressed with like
Yeah.
how crazy this is and like wow, there's like something going on here. Not just people tricking each other. Like there's some real powerful belief and commitment going on. And so,
Well, the term Christian originally was a derogatory term And the Romans made fun of them and used the term Christian to make fun of believers in Christ because they considered it a religion of slaves and women who were all second or third class citizens. They had no rights. Slaves and women didn't have any rights. That's why you get all the text about how to be a slave and how to treat your master. And there are so many conversion stories because of the way that slaves interacted with the slave owners. They were converting slave owners into the Christian faith by the way that they were interacting with the slave owners. This is what St. Paul is talking about when he's talking about um, if you convert to Christianity and your spouse, and it was typically talking about a husband, is still a pagan and praying to pagan deities, just stick with the faith of Christianity because you will bring salvation to your house because they were converting their husbands. Even though they were viewed as second class citizens, eventually it all worked its way out. And the, it went from in the Roman Empire from the religion of slaves and women to becoming the religion of the emperor, right? And you have all this lineage of saints that run through there, and many of which are women. And so when people want to talk about the way that Christians quote unquote treat women and view women, and they point to the biblical text, that's not like Paul was not advertising like treat women as a second class citizen. What he was saying was, this is the way you were treated. And if you were going to be treated this way in your society, this is the way to best interact with your society to have a Christian kind of like aura about you and put off the correct like stance and come across properly within your society. Therefore, you are spreading Christianity, and this is the way you do it. We've all heard stories of like Muslims that behead a Christian, like Islamist or ISIS members that behead a Christian. And after seeing the way the Christian died and with what dignity and faith they died in, the Muslim turns around and repents and ends up being beheaded too, because they are like, well, I want to be part of that faith. And that's part of the faith of the Christian doctrine is that death, that martyrdom in the reflects the death of Christ and therefore converts the masses.
I had never heard that, and I had never heard about slaves converting their masters. But when I was a kid in church, they told us about Christians being tortured by the Roman torturers, and the torturers would convert. Which at the time I thought that's pretty,
That's
that's pretty,
crazy.
that's pretty crazy. But now that like I've read so much, more about torture, and I've like interacted with the fact that I live in a society that openly embrace torture and the war on terrorism. That's like even more mind blowing. Like whoa, what's that's some pretty heavy shit. And like, I mean, can you imagine like s- you know some guy from Iowa waterboarding some Muslim at Guantanamo, at Gitmo, and then he's like so impressed with the guy, or something happens in that room, he's like, I'm gonna be a Muslim. Like that'd be nuts. That would
Mm.
freak out the power structure. So it must have been like really unsettling to the Roman power structure to have their torturers converting to Christianity.
Yeah. 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 I read so I do on my Substack, uh, every day I release an episode of the Prologue of Orid. So the Prologue of Orid is an Orthodox daily devotional, and it has like a couple of lives of saints. It has a contemplation, a reflection, a hymn, and then a homily attached to it. But the real like focus is the lives of the saints, which you usually have anywhere between 2 and 5 saints per day that you read a little bit on. And there's a lot of I just read one the other day. I can't remember who it was. I'm still learning the saints' names, and there's a lot of them, so it's hard to keep track. But there was one I read the other day where it was a guy who very similar to like St. Paul's story, right? Who tortured and killed a Christian and saw the faith of this Christian and then turned around and said, "You need to kill me too, because I'm now a Christian." And it's just crazy. Like the martyrdom, the idea of martyrdom. I mean, it's really emphasized in Orthodoxy. I've never heard it emphasized in any sort of Protestantism. I have never been Catholic, so I can't talk about the Catholic Church in this way. But
We
martyrdom
don't.
is extremely like emphasized in Orthodoxy. When you talk about the monks and living like on like let's say on Mount Athos, for 40 years, and you're a hesychast, which means like 13 hours a day, 14 hours a day, you're in prayer, you know, that's considered a type of martyrdom on this earth. Like you're not being killed for your faith, but you're basically like you're dead to the world. You're not part of the world, which is kind of like the point. Like these, this, this brand, Death to the World. It's an Orthodox brand. They came out with zines back in the '90s. Now they have like all these cool shirts with like the skulls of monks on them and shit like that. And it's kind of like this. Like it kind of steps in and says, when you were going through this struggle of like going through this metal phase or punk rock phase or whatever in your life, what you were actually looking for was you were looking for an escape from this fallen world. And the escape from the fallen world was actually in purity and not in like degeneracy. Right. And so that's kind of like the whole game. But it's like, yeah, like the whole thing, like die to yourself. It's not dying, it's not like suicidal death. What it is, it's escaping your passions. So like you're killing that side of yourself that desires things that are detrimental to your body and spirit. And so that's a type of martyrdom. So when you look at the monks, you are looking at a type of martyr.
So just to bring it back to Mr. Olinsky here,
Yeah, love and faith.
when um, he's talking about the patterns, the search for the pattern. We had talked before about the link between pattern and father through paternal.
Hmm.
That he's so deeply riffing off of um, the Christian worldview, sometimes like consciously to be antagonistic to it, but sometimes just perhaps he's not trying to be antagonistic, just unconsciously. Like that's all there is for him to play with.
Yeah. All right. So, love and faith are not common companions. More commonly, power and fear consort with faith. The have nots have a limited faith in the worth of their own judgments. They still look to the judgments of the haves. They respect the strength of the upper class, and they believe that the haves are more intelligent, more competent, and endowed with something special. Distance has a way of enhancing power so that respect becomes tinged with reverence. The haves are the authorities and thus the beneficiaries of the various myths and legends that always develop around power. The have nots will believe them where they would be hesitant and uncertain about their own judgments. Power is not to be crossed. One must respect and obey. Power means strength, whereas love is a human frailty that people mistrust. It is a sad fact of life that power and fear are the fountainheads of faith. The job of the organizer is to maneuver and bait the establishment so that it will publicly attack him as a dangerous enemy. The word enemy is sufficient to put the organizer on the side of the people, to identify him with the have nots, but it is not enough to endow him with the special qualities that induce fear and thus give him the means to establish his own power against the establishment. Here again, we find that it is power and fear that are essential to the development of faith. This need is met, excuse me, by the establishment's use of the brand dangerous. For in that one word, the establishment reveals its fear of the organizer, its fear that he represents a threat to its omnipotence. Now the organizer has his birth certificate and can begin. In 1939, when I
Wait,
first
that's
began
great.
to,
He's reborn,
yeah, I mean,
baptized.
how many times do we have to point this out? He's also omnipotent. In 1939, when I first began to uh, organize back of the old Chicago stockyards on the site of Upton Sinclair's jungle, I acted in such a way that within a few weeks, the meat packers publicly pronounced me a subversive menace. The Chicago Tribune's adoption of me as a public enemy of law and order, a radical's radical, gave me a perennial and constantly renewable baptismal certificate in the city of Chicago. A generation later, in a black community on Chicago's south side, next to my alma mater, the University of Chicago, it was the university's virulent personal attack on me, argumented by attacks by the press, that strengthened my credentials with a black community somewhat suspicious of white skin. Eastman Kodak and the Gannett newspaper chain did the same for me in Rochester, New York. In both black ghettos, in Chicago and in Rochester, the reaction was the way the fat cat white newspapers are ripping hell out of Alinsky, he must be all right. I could very easily have gone into either Houston, Texas, or Oakland, California. In the former, the Ku Klux Klan appeared at the airport in full regalia with threats against my personal security. The Houston press printed charges against me by the mayor of Houston, and therefore was a mass picket line by the John Birch Society. In Oakland, the city council, fearing the possibility of my coming into Oakland, passed a widely publicized special resolution declaring me unwelcome in the city. In both cases, the black communities were treated to the spectacle of seeing the establishment react with unusually severe fear and hysteria. See, he's playing on that same kind of idea of being the martyr. The martyrdom creates his popularity.
Yeah, in a society that, for whatever reason, is unwilling to martyr him.
Yeah, exactly.
Like when he's talking about this stuff, my mind kind of goes to like, especially when he's talking about antagonizing the establishment. Like my mind goes to Vladimir Lenin,
Mm.
who would be like, I think, this is just my interpretation, but he'd be like, kill that guy. And if they were like, sir, you're gonna make him a martyr and like cause like, the people to rise up. He's like, well, then we'll kill 10% of the people until they get in line. Like, sir, the people enforcing this policy are are quitting and they're converting to Alinsky's um, ideology. Well, then find tougher people. Like he had this kind of like will that just I don't really see in our establishment. And I don't know if it's like, is that mean because they're weaker or because they have a better interaction with like morality or what it is? But it's almost like Alinsky is like a child having a temper tantrum, and the establishment is the parents that aren't going to kill him because he's a child. They're going to like try to like chase him around and put him in timeout. And
So
so
you
it's
think of
almost like,
Lennon, and I think of the Clintons. They would just be like, suicide this dude.
that's awesome. I've never in my mind juxtaposed the Clintons with Lennon, and now I always will. That's so great. You know what's so funny about that is our great leader and mentor, Scott Horton, once said to me, he's like, dude, uh, Winston Churchill, he was just George W. Bush.
Mm,
At the time, I was like, whoa, like that's a little over the top. Like I couldn't really like see it. But I was like, well, Scott's saying it, so I know it's good.
yeah.
But then I read this book, and it's like an establishment book. It's not a revisionist history. It's called The Splendid and the Vile,
Mm,
about the London Blitz. And it's hilarious because the book starts with like London getting bombed. So for a few years, I didn't even realize that Britain bombed Germany first, which
oh, really?
if anyone's interested in this, Keith Knight at the Libertarian Institute has done amazing work on the mythology of World War II. You can find it on YouTube. He goes into Winston Churchill's uh, autobiography and his histories of the First World War and the Second World War, and it's just amazing. But yeah, Britain. I'm not here. I'm not apologizing for Nazi Germany. I'm just saying that Britain bombed Germany first. But
Hmm.
usually it gets portrayed to us like Germany started bombing.
Yeah, they just went crazy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but in that book, he's talking about Winston Churchill. He's an alcoholic. He's crazy, and I was like, this guy is worse than George W. Bush.
Mhm.
But yeah, like the mythology of Winston Churchill, the savior of Western civilization, like I had like bought into that like deeply in my being because I've been fed that since I was a little kid.
Right.
So it's like um yeah, like George W. Bush being juxtaposed with Winston Churchill is how you should think about it. And now, thanks to you, I will always think of Vladimir Lenin when I see the Clintons.
Well, people don't understand that we're like on the fourth iteration of America. Like it says, like this is definitely not the same country that was under the Articles of Confederation, which was not the same country that was under the Constitution, which was not the same country post Civil War, which was not the same country post World War II. Right. And we all had and each one of them had their war and had their like articles. Right. So you had the Revolutionary War and you had the Constitution, and then you had the Civil War and you had the Gettysburg Address. Then you had World War II and you had the Civil Rights Movement. Like all of them have their documents and have their founding. You know, their founding war and their founding documents. And you just got to figure out where you're at on the timeline. If you still look at the Constitution as being the rule of law in the United States, then you are sadly mistaken. The rule of law is the civil rights movement. Civil rights law is what rules the day. If the Constitution runs up against civil rights law, the civil rights law will win out every time.
Why is that? Why did World War II lead to the Civil Rights Act?
Why? Oh, I mean, I don't know if there's a good reason why. I just know it did. I just know that like they work hand in glove, right? So you had to end oppression. Maybe that's what it is. End oppression of the Jews, because you know the story around World War II changed after the war. You know, prior to the war, we entered the war because Japan bombed us. But after the war, we had to go into the war to save the Jews. Yeah, but that wasn't none of that shit was happening at the beginning of the war. Like when we entered the war, there was no Holocaust going on. That's not what was going on. Like Hitler was trying to export all the Jews out of Germany, and everybody kept turning them down. So then they started trying to set up the nation state of Israel, which ended up happening after World War II. But that all started under Nazi Germany. So maybe it was just the look of okay, after World War II, then the dialogue around World War II became the oppression of the Jews. And they looked around and said, well, we have the oppression of these people and these people and these people. And so we have to write documents that do not lead to our own form of Holocaust. Maybe it's that simple. I don't know.
I like that because
I have trouble getting into the psychology of those psychopaths that run the nation. So
so my take on World War II is mythology became like it's a perfect narrative. You have the victor, the villain, and the victim.
mhm,
Perfect triangle where America is the victor,
mhm.
the
Actually, it was Russia.
Nazis are the villain. And yeah, we forget about the Soviet Union. You watch Saving Private Ryan. Where are the Russians? They're not there. You saw if you saw Inglorious Bastards.
Yeah.
Inglorious Bastards is a funny film because people like interact with it is like, oh, Quentin Tarantino gave World War II a happy ending. It's like, well, I thought World War II already had a happy ending.
Right.
But what's funny in that movie, what's revisionist in that movie is the same thing that's revisionist in a lot of our World War II movies, is there's no Soviets.
Yeah.
It's like we did it, we are the victor. We did it all by ourselves. There's no British. Well, there are British in that movie. But in Saving Private
Didn't the
Ryan,
Soviet Union lose like 600,000 people in that war? That's insane. That's a lot of fucking people. Isn't that what it was? Wasn't it 600,000 that died like fighting against Germany in the Soviet Union? They were fighting on the front lines.
so you've got us as the victor, and we're pure good. As Scott would say, America is Superman.
Mm.
The Nazis are pure evil. That's why we always compare, or we tend to compare, the enemy to the Nazis. Saddam Hussein is Hitler revisited. Putin is another Hitler, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and then the Jews are the archetypal victim, and that like idea of archetypal victimhood is so important in the creation of the state of Israel, but it's also so important in the mythology of the American Empire. And so I like your idea that then they were like, well, we have these other oppressed groups. We should do something about that. And
Mm.
then I'm working on this article about mass immigration and deportation and ICE for the Institute. And one idea I've been really interacting with is is something that I'd noticed.
God, my beard's getting white. Sorry.
It looks good, brother. Is it's funny that like in America, we're hypersensitive to like, or the culture is hypersensitive to like racism and prejudice. So if I was like, if you were like, John, why are you late? And I was like, this color guy cut me off in traffic. People would be like, oh my God, he's a Nazi, because you're
This
supposed to say
Negro.
person of, yeah, oh my God, what if I said this Negro? But like the NAACP still gets to exist. But like, yeah, if I was like a Negro cut me off in traffic, Tommy, people would be like, oh my God, he's a monster. Say person of color. Like, wait a minute. So if I say person of color, I'm a good person. If I say colored person, I'm a Nazi. That's in America. But then our foreign policy has killed millions of brown people. And
Mm.
we're completely genocidal and racist in our rhetoric, not us, but like our government, where they're like, Iran is not a normal country. They're a bunch of savages. They don't value life the way we do. Like, what? And so I found Justin Raimondo has a great quote about that, where he's like, the more hypersensitive the empire gets domestically about race, like the more genocidal it gets in its foreign policy. And Samuel Huntington interacts with that idea, where there's an obsession with diversity in the mainland. But then in the foreign policy, there's an obsession with you better bend the knee to our uniform power.
Yeah, but the woke activists would consider Iranians, the Persian people in general, white. I just love I love the term like Caucasian. That just always strikes me as funny. I don't know. It's like I don't think I have one gene that has ever touched the Caucasus Mountains. So, so I don't know how I get labeled in that, but whatever. But yeah,
Have you
it's,
seen Dow Cooper was just interviewed by Tom Woods?
I did not see that.
It's really good. And they're talking about immigration. And one thing he says in there is that um that in as you're talking about, he doesn't put it exactly as you did, but there's these waves and waves of immigration. The country is changing. And in the South, they have two identity groups, black and white. But in the North, for most of this time, the immigration is coming in from Europe.
Mm,
It's not until the 1930s and 1940s that there's mass migration of blacks into the northern cities.
hmm.
So in the cities, you've got the Irish neighborhood and the Italian neighborhood and the
Right.
German neighborhood and the Jewish neighborhood. But once the blacks start coming in, they're like, well, we're going to move to the suburbs and kind of like at some level all be white together. So it's funny if when like a liberal intellectual is like, man, race is just a social construct. Like that's either true or like there's a way in which that's true. Um, they're obviously trying to like push their insane communist agenda, but there is a way in which, yeah, the Italians and the Irish and the English and the Germans and the Jews all started to think of themselves as somehow like in a similar as an in-group loyalty because of this influx of black people. So it would really make more sense instead of saying like white, just say not black. That's what Americans are talking about. But it's like because of the ideology, because of the woke uh, propaganda, it would be uncomfortable for people to think like that. If the census was just like black and not black, people would be upset.
Yeah. And NWA would be not white attitude. I don't know why when we were talking about Negroes, that's what popped in my head. So
That's
I
amazing.
had to fit that joke in.
That's a good joke. That's a banger. I'm gonna use that. I will give you credit.
Yeah. 21st century in NWA, not white attitude.
Yo, man, you don't want to go to that neighborhood. The attitude around there is just not white.
It's like Rachel Dolezal.
Dude, you want to hear a funny story?
Yeah.
So I used to work in politics. I was a legislative aide for a state representative in Massachusetts, a Democrat state representative. And I had left that job. I was back to being a civilian when that Rachel, what's her name?
Dolezal.
Yeah, when that story came out, and I was like, oh my God, thank God I'm not in politics right now because I don't know what I'm supposed to think about this. And I like actually like stayed in my like room for like 5 days, like afraid, like just waiting for like the higher ups to come. I wasn't even in the game anymore, but just
Right.
waiting for the higher ups to come down with the ruling because I was like, wait a minute, like you can be transgender,
Why can't you
you
be
know, you can
transracial?
be, can you be transracial,
You can get
and then
furry.
the ruling came down that no, you can't be because you don't have the lived experience or whatever. And I was like, that's kind of funny that you can like present as a guy in a dress to like everyone else in society and see, but like, no, I identify as a woman and you have to respect that. But you can't present as a white person, even if you look black, thanks to whatever you've done, and say, no, I actually am black. So then it's like, well, wait, are you saying like race is genetic? And it's like when you think about when you interact with the left ideology long enough, like you start to go insane because you realize it's insane.
Yeah. Yeah. It's nuts. There was that guy that was going around. I don't remember what his name was, but he was pulling the same type of shit. He was like a white dude from a traditionally white family, and he was identifying as black. And, I was like, all right, man, whatever, dude. I guess you could just say whatever, Like we live in a post-truth society, so you can just say whatever you want to say, and I'm supposed to like encourage your delusions. So,
Well, I mean, if race is just a social construct, baby, I want to construct myself as black. And that is funny that where it's like, and I'm someone who always wants to, or generally tends to want to respect someone else's position. But the idea that like once I tell you what my identity is and how I view the world, then you are have this normative commitment to embrace that and to respect it and to go along with it.
right. Yeah.
Not the other way, not like, well, we have a disagreement.
Yeah.
It's rude.
Yep. Yep.
Very
Yep.
rude.
Establishing one's credentials of competency is only part of the organizer's first job. He needs other credentials to begin, credentials that enable him to meet the question, who asked you to come in here, with the answer, you did. He must be invited by a significant sector of the local population, their churches, street organizations, social clubs, or other groups. Today, my notoriety and the hysterical instant reaction of the establishment not only validate my credentials of competency, but also ensure automatic popular invitation. An example was the invitation into the black ghettos in Rochester. In 1964, Rochester exploded in a bloody race riot, resulting in the calling of the National Guard, the fatal crash of a police helicopter, and considerable loss of life and property. In its wake, the city was numb with shock. A city proud of its affluence, culture, and progressive churches was dazed and guilt ridden at its rude discovery of the misery of life in the ghetto and of its failure to do anything about it. The City Council of Churches, representing the Protestant churches, approached me and asked me if I would be available to help organize the black ghetto to get equality, jobs, housing, quality education, and particularly power to participate in the decision making in all public programs involving their people. They also demanded that the representatives of the black community in 1964, they were probably more concerned with the CIA stopping their importing of heroin into the black community. But that's another story. If you want to know more about that, read about Operation Gladio. They also demanded that the representatives of the black community be those chosen by the blacks and not those selected by the white establishment. I advised the church council of the cost and said that my organization was available. The council agreed to the cost and invited us to come in and organize. I replied then that the churches had a right to invite us in to organize their people in their neighborhoods, but that they had no right to speak for, let alone invite anyone into the black community. I emphasized that we were not a colonial power like the churches who sent their missionaries everywhere, whether they were invited or not. That is not colonialism, dude. You are such a pussy. The black community had been silent, but at that point, panic gripped the white establishment. The Rochester Press and front page stories and editorials raised the cry that if I came to Rochester, it would mean the end of good fellowship, of Brotherhood Week, of Christian understanding between black and white. It meant that I would say to the blacks, the only way you can get your legitimate rights is to organize. Get the power and tell the white establishment either come around or else. The blacks read and heard and agreed. Between the press and the mass media, you would have assumed that my coming to Rochester was equivalent to the cities being invaded by the Russians, the Chinese, and the bubonic plague. Rochesterians will never forget it, and one had to be there to believe it. And so we were invited in by nearly every church and organization in the ghetto and by petitions signed by thousands of ghetto residents. Now we had a legitimate right to be there, even more of a right than any of the inviting organizations in the ghetto, for even they had not been invited in by the mass of their community. This advantage is the dividend of reputation, but the important issue here is how the organizer without a reputation gets the invitation. The organizer's job is to inseminate an invitation for himself, to agitate, introduce ideas, get people pregnant with hope and a desire for change, and to identify you as the person most qualified for this purpose. Here, the tool of the organizer in the agitation leading to the invitation, as well as actual organization and education of local leadership, is the use of the question, the Socratic method. Organizer, do you live over in that slummy building? Answer, yeah, what about it? Organizer, what the hell do you live there for? Answer, what do you mean? What do I live there for? Where else am I going to live? I'm on welfare. Organizer, oh, you mean you pay rent in that place? Answer, come on, is that a put on? Very funny. You know where you can live for free. Organizer, huh, that place looks like it's crawling with rats and bugs. Answer, it sure is. Organizer, did you ever try to get that landlord to do anything about it? Answer, try to get him to do anything about anything. If you don't like it, get out. That's all he has to say. There are plenty more waiting. Organizer, what if you didn't pay your rent? Answer, they'd throw us out in 10 minutes. Organizer, what if nobody in that building paid their rent? Answer, well, they'd start to throw, hey, they'd have trouble throwing everybody out, wouldn't they? Organizer, yeah, I guess they would. Answer, hey, maybe you got something. Say, I'd like you to meet some of my friends. How about a drink? Policy after power. One of the great problems in the beginning of an organization is often that the people do not know what they want. Discovering this stirs up in the organizer that inner doubt shared by so many, whether the masses of people are competent to make decisions for a democratic society. It is the schizophrenia of a free society that we outwardly espouse faith in the people, but inwardly have strong doubts whether the people can be trusted.
Yeah,
These reservations.
have you met the people?
But the people are retarded. This is a government for the people, by the people, and of the people, but the people are retarded. Where was I? These reservations can destroy the effectiveness of the most creative and talented organizer. Many times, contact with low income groups does not fire one with enthusiasm for the political gospel of democracy. This disillusionment comes partly because we romanticize the poor in a way we romanticize other sectors of society, and partly because when you talk with any people, you find yourselves confronted with cliches, a variety of superficial, stereotyped responses, and a general lack of information. In a black ghetto, if you ask, what's wrong? You were told, well, the schools are segregated. What do you think should be done to make better schools? Well, they should be desegregated. How? Well, you know. And if you say you don't know, then a lack of knowledge or an inability on the part of the one you are talking to may show itself in a defensive, hostile reaction. You whites were responsible for the segregation in the first place. We didn't do it, so it's your problem, not ours. You started it, you finish it. If you pursue the point by asking, well, what else is wrong with the schools right now? You get the answer, the buildings are old, the teachers are bad. We've got to have change. Well, what kind of change? Well, everybody knows things have to be changed. That is usually the end of the line. No, then they start asking for money when money never fixes it. If you push it any further, you come again to a hostile defensive reaction or to withdraw as they suddenly remember they have to be somewhere else. The issue that is not clear to organizers, missionaries, educators, or any outsider is simply that if people feel they don't have the power to change a bad situation, then they do not think about it. Why start figuring out how you are going to spend $1 million if you do not have $1 million or are ever going to have $1 million, unless you want to engage in fantasy? Once people are organized so that they have the power to make changes, then when confronted with questions of change, they begin to think and to ask questions about how to make the changes. If the teachers in the schools are bad, then what do we mean by a bad teacher? They probably are molesting children. That's number one issue that we have with teachers. What is a good teacher? How do we get good teachers? When we say our children do not understand what the teachers are talking about and our teachers do not understand what the children are talking about, then we ask how communication can be established. Why cannot teachers communicate with the children and the latter with the teachers? What are the hangups? Why don't the teachers understand what the values are in our neighborhood? How can we make them understand? All these and many other perceptive questions begin to arise. It is when people have a genuine opportunity to act and to change conditions that they begin to think their problems through. Then they show their competence, raise the right questions, seek special professional counsel, and look for the answers. Then you begin to realize that believing in people is not just a romantic myth. But here you see that the first requirement for communication and education is for people to have a reason for knowing. It is the creation of the instrument or the circumstances of power that provides the reason and makes knowledge essential. Remember, too, that a powerless people will not be purposefully curious about life, and that they then cease being alive. Something else that comes with experience is the knowledge that the resolution of a particular problem will bring on another problem. The organizer may know this, but he doesn't mention it. If he did, he would invite and encounter a feeling of futility on the part of the others. Why bother doing this if it means another problem? We fight and win, and what have we won? So let's forget it. He knows too that what we fight for now as matter of life and death will be soon forgotten, and changed situations will change desires and issues. It is common for policy to be the product of power. You begin to build power for a particular program, then the program changes when some power has been built. The reaction of the Woodlawn leaders was typical on this point. In the beginning of the organization of the Black Ghetto of Woodlawn, there were five major issues involving urban renewal, all centering on stopping the close by University of Chicago from bulldozing the ghetto. The Woodlawn organization quickly developed power and scored a series of victories. 8 months later, the city of Chicago issued a new policy statement on urban renewal. That day, the leaders of the Woodlawn organization stormed into my office, angrily denouncing the policy statement. The city can't get away with this. Who do they think they are? We'll put barricades in our streets. We'll fight. Throughout the tirade, it never occurred to any of the angry leaders that the city's new policy granted all the five demands for which the Woodlawn organization began. Then they were fighting for hamburger. Now they wanted filet mignon. So it goes. And why not? An organizer knows.
May I interject?
Yes, go ahead, buddy.
So, in Massachusetts, there's a town called Newburyport, and it is a beautiful seaside town. It's got cute little restaurants and cafes, and they've got like the streets they've blocked off from traffic, so you can just walk around. And it's like there's fashion shops, and it's safe, and it's just amazing.
It's like New Orleans without all the piss and vomit.
But there is a book called Townie, and it's a memoir by an American writer. And he wrote some novel that I haven't read that got turned into some movie I haven't seen called The House of Sand and Fog or something like that.
Yeah,
so I haven't read that.
I've seen the movie, I think.
I haven't
Sounds
seen
very
it.
familiar. I think I saw it like years ago.
It was like a major Hollywood production.
Yeah.
But he wrote a memoir called Townie, and it's all about him growing up, raised by a single mother in these rough Massachusetts towns,
Mhm.
one of which was Newburyport. So this is Newburyport in the 1970s. So I'm reading this book, and he's talking about being in Newburyport, and I'm like, this is not the Newburyport I know. The Newburyport I know from this is like 10 years ago, is like really nice. So then I'm at this like peak liberal event. After I worked in politics, I did some writing for an like arts activist group
Mhm.
run by an artist, really good artist, beautiful work. So I'm at one of her showings in Boston. So I'm at this like fancy gallery. I'm drinking, really nice wine. Tommy, this is some good wine. with like really wealthy white liberal bitches. Like I'm just living it up. And they one of them brought up that book. She's like, "Oh, I'm reading Townie right now." Another one's like, "Oh, it's a really good book." And I was like, "Yo, what's up with that? What's up with Newburyport? Like the Newburyport I know is amazing, but the Newburyport in that book is like horrible." And one of them goes, "Oh, well, Newburyport was gentrified." And I'm like, "It was that's because of gentrification? Why are we against that then?" Because in the ideology that I'm immersed
Right.
in, like
Yeah.
I was like, gentrification is amazing. And like in my mind, quickly did the calculation. I was like, well, I don't have anything against the poor people. They gotta live someplace. Why does it matter if they live over there? And this place can be super nice. And like I started thinking about that when Alinsky here is talking about, organizing to fight the urban renewal. And it's funny because in the libertarian circles and in some conservative circles, but where there's this idea of like people can be somewhat free to create wealth and to trade with each other voluntarily. And like that's what makes things better. And to go back to our man Keith Knight, he has a really hilarious take on this where he's like, there are people who believe that they can work hard, they can be entrepreneurial, they can meet the needs of other people voluntarily, and that's how they can make their life better. And there's people who believe the way you make your life better is by going to protests and by voting. It's not even like I'm going to use state power to like take money for myself. It's like this weaker position down the stream from that. It's like, I'm going to go to the protest and that'll make things better.
Yeah.
And like, have you seen the new mayor of New York is going to set up city run supermarkets?
Yeah, he had said that when he was running for office, but I didn't think it was ever going to happen.
So he's like apparently trying to do it. I've seen reports that he's like trying to move ahead with it.
Mm.
To me, it's so hilarious. It's like, okay, at least the Bolsheviks knew that like food comes from the farms. Like we're going to collectivize the agriculture. He actually, I'm not saying he thinks this, but it's like the implication of his policy is that it operates on the belief
The
food just
store
comes
produces
from the
it. Yeah, it
supermarket.
just pops up on the shelf.
Yeah. And we
Like,
just
where
need to
does milk
control
come
this.
from? It comes from the store.
Yeah. That's hilarious.
I wouldn't be surprised if he thinks that way, though. I've heard people talk like that, you know?
So, like, seriously, if he really cared about these people, if he just embraced gentrification, urban renewal, and entrepreneurialness, and like helping small business owners operate without the crushing tyranny of the state, he could have actually made their lives so much better than
Yeah.
just like, oh, come to my come to my organization and
Yeah.
pay dues, man. I'm not a
Yeah, but
Fed.
it's not about, I mean, but it's not about solving the problem. It's about perpetuating problems and making money. Yeah. You always have to have the next problem. I mean, he even admits it. They started off wanting hamburger and now they want filet mignon. So it goes. And why not? And that's how he makes his money by continuing to perpetuate the issues.
It's funny because as my wife once brilliantly said about government, it's not about getting the job done. It's about doing the job.
Yeah. Yeah. What was that? Was that oh, it was one of the economists. I can't remember which one it was. It wasn't Milton Friedman. Might have been Milton Friedman, but he was talking about being in China and they were they were doing this uh digging these trenches with shovels. And he goes, you know, you can get that job done a lot faster if you get some heavy equipment out here. And the uh the guy that was touring him around said, well, this is a jobs program. He said, then why not use spoons? You know, like if your purpose is the job and not the end of the job, then just freaking do it as slow as possible. So, all right. An organizer knows that life is a sea of shifting desires, changing elements of relativity and uncertainty, and yet he must stay within the experience of the people he is working with and act in terms of specific resolutions and answers of definitiveness and certainty. To do otherwise would be to stifle organization and action, for what the organizer accepts as uncertainty would be seen by them as a terrifying chaos. In the early days, the organizer moves out front in any situation of risk where the power of the establishment can get someone's job, call in an overdue payment, or any other form of retaliation, partly because these dangers would cause many local people to back off from conflict. Here, the organizer serves as a protective shield. If anything goes wrong, it is all his fault. He has the responsibility. If they are successful, all credit goes to the local people. He acts as the septic tank in the early stages. He gets all the shit. Later, as power increases, the risks diminish, and gradually the people step out front to take the risks. This is part of the process of growing up, both for the local community leaders and for the organization. The organizer must know and be sensitive to the shadows that surround him during his first days in the community. One of the shadows is that it is just about impossible for people to fully understand, much less adhere to, a totally new idea. The fear of change is, as discussed earlier, one of our deepest fears, and a new idea must be at the least couched in the language of past ideas. Often it must be at first diluted with vestiges of the past. Rationalization. A large shadow over organizing efforts in the beginning is then rationalization. Everyone has a reason or rationalization for what he does or does not do. No matter what, every action carries its rationalization. One of Chicago's political ward bosses, nationally notorious for his use of the chain ballot and multiple voting, once unleashed a tirade well seasoned with alcohol on my being a disloyal American. He climaxed with, and you, Alinsky, when that great day of America, Election Day, comes around, that day of the right to vote for which our ancestors fought and died, when that great day comes around, you care so little for your country that you never even bother to vote more than once. Wow, that took him a long time to climax. I'm lucky if I get out an O. Organizing, don't fall out of the chair, dude. Organizing, one must be aware of the tremendous importance of understanding the part played by rationalization on a mass basis. It is similar to the function on an individual basis. On a mass basis, it is the community residents and leadership's justification for why they have not been able to do anything until the organizer appeared. It is primarily a subconscious feeling that the organizer is looking down on them, wondering why they did not have the intelligence, so to speak, and the insights to realize that through organization and the securing of power, they could have resolved many of the problems they've lived with for these many years. Why did they have to wait for him? With this going on in their minds, they throw up a whole series of arguments against various organizational procedures, but they are not real arguments, simply attempts to justify the fact that they have not moved or organized in the past. Most people find this necessary not only to justify themselves to the organizer, but also to themselves. In an individual, a psychiatrist would call these rationalizations, as we call them here, defenses. The patient has a series of defenses, which in therapy have to be broken through to get to the problem, which the patient then is compelled to confront. Chasing rationalizations is like attempting to find the rainbow. Rationalizations must be recognized as such so that the organizer does not get trapped in communication problems or in treating them as the real situations. An extreme example, but one that very clearly spelled out the nature of rationalizations, came about 3 years ago when I met with various Canadian Indian leaders in the north of a Canadian province. I was there at the invitation of these leaders who wanted to discuss their problems and solicit my advice. The problems of the Canadian Indians are very similar to those of the American Indians. They need to go back to India. They are on reservations. They are segregated, relatively speaking, and they suffer from all the general discriminatory practices Indians have been subjected to since the white man took over North America. In Canada, the census figures on the Indian population range from 150,000 to 225,001 out of a total population estimated at between 22 and 24 million.
May
The
I
com-
please interject?
yes, interject.
I'd like to make a descriptive point,
Yes,
not
sir.
a normative point, just a descriptive point. When the humans had their, when the Homo sapiens had their showdown with the Neanderthals, they killed all of them. But if they hadn't, if they'd left a few of them alive, we'd be hearing about it now. Like, we need reparations for the Neanderthals. The Neanderthals live in the ghetto. The Neanderthals were on the reservation. There's horrors at the Neanderthal school. So I'm just saying, there's utility, one might say, for future generations when the current generation kills everyone and not just most of them.
Yeah.
I don't say that as a normative thing, just as a descriptive thing.
Yeah, no, it's just an
You
observation.
never hear people bitching about the Neanderthals.
Right. Yeah, that is a fact. The conversation began with my suggesting that the general approach should be that the Indians get together, crossing all tribal lines, and organize. Because of their relatively small numbers, I thought that they should then work with various sectors of the white liberal population. Oh, y'all even had white liberals back then? Golly. Gain them as allies and then begin to move nationally. Immediately, I ran into the rationalizations. The dialogue went something like this. I should preface this by noting that it was quite obvious what was happening since I could see from the way the Indians were looking at each other, they were thinking, so we invite this white organizer from south of the border to come up here and he tells us to get organized and do these things. What must be going through his mind is, what's wrong with you Indians that you have been sitting around here for a couple of 100 years now and you haven't organized to do these things? And so it began. Indians, well, we can't organize. Me, why not? Indians, because that's a white man's way of doing things. Me, I don't want to know what you were thinking. Me, I don't understand. Indians, well, you see, if we organize, that means getting out and fighting the way you were telling us to do. And that would mean that we would be corrupted by the white man's culture and lose our own values. Me, what are these values that you would lose? Indians, smoke 'em peace pipe. Well, there are all kinds of values. Me, like what? Indians, well, there's creative fishing. Me, what do you mean creative fishing? Indians, creative fishing. Okay. Me, I heard you the first time. What is this creative fishing? Indians, well, you see, when you whites go out and fish, you just go out and fish, don't you? Me, yeah, I guess so. Indians, well, you see, when we go out and fish, we fish creatively. Me, yeah, that's the third time you've come around with that. What is this creative fishing? Indians, well, to begin with, when we go out fishing, we get away from everything. We get way out in the woods. Me, well, we whites don't exactly go fishing in Times Square, you know. Indians, yes, but it's different with us. When we go out, we're out on the water, and you can hear the lap of the waves on the bottom of the canoe, and the birds in the trees, and the leaves rustling. And you know what I mean? Me, no, I don't know what you mean. Furthermore, I think that that's just a pile of shit. Do you believe it yourself? This brought a shocked silence. It should be noted that I was not being profane purely for the sake of being profane. I was doing this purposefully. If I had responded in a tactful way, saying, well,
Creatively, one might
yeah,
say.
it's creative cussing. It's like Picasso. Well, I don't quite understand what you mean. We would have been off for a ride around the rhetorical ranch for the next 30 days. Here, profanity became literally an up against the wall bulldozer. From there, we went off to creative welfare. Creative welfare seemed to have to do with since whites stole Indians' lands, all Indians' welfare payments are really installment payments due to them, and it's not really welfare or charity. Well, that took us another 5 or 10 minutes, and we kept breaking through one creative rationalization after another until finally we got down to the issue of organization. An interesting aftermath is that some of this was filmed by the National Film Board of Canada, which was doing a series of documentaries on my work, and a film with part of this episode was shown at a meeting of Canadian development workers with a number of these Indians present. The white Canadian community development workers kept looking at the floor very embarrassed during the reels during the unreeling of that scene and giving sidelong looks at the Indians. After it was over, one of the Indians stood up and said, "When Mr. Olinsky told us we were full of shit, that was the first time a white man has really talked to us as equals. You would never say that to us. You would always say, 'Well, I can see your point of view, but I'm a little confused,' and stuff like that. In other words, you treat us like children." Learn to search out the rationalizations, treat them as rationalizations, and break through. Do not make the mistake of locking yourself up in conflict with them as though they were the issues or problems with which you are trying to engage the local people.
Tell me, I have a comment and a question for you.
Yes, sir.
So my comment is when the Indians are like, yo, organizing, that's the white man's game.
Mm.
I always find stuff like that so hilarious. And I've heard people say things like physics is a white supremacist construct.
Milk is white
Yeah.
supremacy.
What the hell? That's insane. And like mathematics
Being
was
on
created.
time is racist. I've heard math is racist. I heard being on time is like white supremacy. Like, 'cause I'm like,
Playing
whatever.
your music at a reasonable
Well, yeah,
volume.
like being responsible is white people.
Yeah, which is funny because like if if you've been like raised in the ideology of don't be racist, but you're somewhat reasonable as I am, like that sounds hyper racist. You know,
Yes.
it's only
Yes.
white people that show up on time and do physics. What? What?
Yeah,
That's
and I don't know if it's racist against white people or black people. So you're telling me black people can't do physics? I mean, like, what are we talking about here?
which is like when George Bush had that line, George W. Bush had that line about the soft bigotry of low expectations.
Hmm.
There's like kind of like a harder bigotry of no expectations that you see from like a lot of liberal white women, where they're like basically the BIPOC, regardless of them being like of adult age, like they're all like retarded children that we are normatively committed to caring for.
Right.
And it's like, wow, that's like so. If someone talked about me like that, I'd be really offended.
Yes.
If someone was like, John, John's one of those people that can't do math. He's
Yeah.
retarded.
And
You know
that's
what?
what that guy said. He's like, that's the first time a white dude's ever talked to us as if we aren't children. You
Yeah.
know?
But now my question is this idea of like rationalization. Like, what's the difference between rationalization and reasoning, do you think?
Well, when you're rationalizing, you're it's you're making up excuses. You're coming up with reasons. You're coming up with rationalization. It's like I told you the last time. Like when you rationalize, you're not repenting, right? So you're not facing the consequences of your actions or lack of actions. You're passing the buck. You're not taking responsibility. So the rationalization is a way for you to not take responsibility for the circumstances and conditions in which that you live.
I like that.
So it's just it's just progressive rationalization. It's like the progressive version of pull yourself up by your bootstraps, but it's like pull yourself up by your bootstraps to join hands with your neighbor and charge the establishment or something. I don't know. Like that Bill Hicks joke, you know, and everywhere around the world they're yelling revolution, revolution. In Alabama, they're yelling evolution, evolution. We want our thumbs.
I haven't heard that one. That's great.
The process of power. From the moment the organizer enters a community, he lives, dreams, eats, breathes, sleeps only one thing, and that is to build the mass power base of what he calls the army. Until he has developed that mass power base, he confronts no major issues. He has nothing with which to confront anything. Until he has those means and power instruments, his tactics are very different from power tactics. Therefore, every move revolves around one central point. How many recruits will this bring into the organization, whether by means of local organizations, churches, service groups, labor unions, corner gangs, or as individuals? The only issue is how will this increase the strength of the organization? If by losing in a certain action he can get more members than by winning, then victory lies in losing and he will lose. Change comes from power, and power comes from organization. In order to act, people must get together. Power is the reason for being of organizations. When people agree on certain religious ideas and want the power to propagate their faith, they organize and call it a church. When people agree on certain political ideas and want the power to put them into practice, they organize and call it a political party. The same reason holds across the board. Power and organization are one and the same. The organizer knows, for example, that his biggest job is to give the people the feeling that they can do something, that while they may accept the idea that organization means power, they have to experience this idea in action. The organizer's job is to begin to build confidence and hope in the idea of organization and thus in the people themselves, to win limited victories, each of which will build confidence and the feeling that if we can do so much with what we have, now just think what we will be able to do when we get big and strong. It is almost like taking a prize fighter up the road to the championship. You have to very carefully and selectively pick his opponents, knowing full well that certain defeats would be demoralizing and end his career. Sometimes the organizer may find such despair among the people that he has to put a cinch fight. An example occurred in the early days back of the yards, the first community that I attempted to organize. The neighborhood was utterly demoralized. The people had no confidence in themselves or in their neighbors or in their cause. So we staged a cinch fight. One of the major problems in back of the yards in those days was an extraordinarily high rate of infant mortality. Some years earlier, the neighborhood had had the services of the Infant Welfare Society medical clinics. But about 10 or 15 years before I came to the neighborhood, the Infant Welfare Society had been expelled because tales were spread that its personnel was disseminating birth control information. The churches therefore drove out these agents of sin. But soon the people were desperately in need of infant medical services. They had forgotten that they themselves had expelled the Infant Welfare Society from the back of the yards community. After checking it out, I found out that all we had to do to get Infant Welfare Society medical services back into the neighborhood was ask for it. However, I kept this information to myself. We called an emergency meeting, recommended we go in committee to the society's offices and demand medical services. Our strategy was to prevent the officials from saying anything, to start banging on the desk and demanding that we get the services, never permitting them to interrupt us or make any statement. The only time we would let them talk was after we got through. With this careful indoctrination, we stormed into the Infant Welfare Society downtown, identified ourselves, and began a tirade consisting of militant demands, refusing to permit them to say anything. All the time, the poor woman was desperately trying to say, "Why, of course you can have it. We'll start immediately." But she never had a chance to say anything, and finally we ended up in a storm of, "And we will not take no for an answer." At which point she said, "Well, I have been trying to tell you," and I cut in demanding, "Is it a yes or is it a no?" She said, "Well, of course it's yes." I said, "That's all we wanted to know." And we stormed out of the place. All the way back to back of the yards, you could hear the members of the committee saying, "Well, that's the way to get things done. You just tell them off and don't give them a chance to say anything." If we could get this with just the few people that we have in the organization now, just imagine what we can get when we have a big organization. The organizer simultaneously carries on many functions as he analyzes, attacks, and disrupts the prevailing power pattern. The ghetto or slum in which he is organizing is not a disorganized community. There is no such animal as a disorganized community. It is a contradiction in terms to use the two words. Excuse me. Use the two words disorganized and community together. The word community itself means an organized communal life, people living in an organized fashion. The people in the community may have experienced successive frustrations to the point that their will to participate has seemed to atrophy. They may be living in anonymity and may be starved for personal recognition. They may be suffering from various forms of deprivation and discrimination. They may have accepted anonymity and resigned in apathy. They may despair that their children will inherit a somewhat better world. From your point of view, they may have a very negative form of existence, but the fact is that they are organized in that way of life. Call it organized apathy or organized non participation, but that is their community pattern. They are living under a certain set of arrangements, standards, way of life. They may, in short, have surrendered, but life goes on in an organized form with a definite power structure, even if it is, as Thoreau called most lives, quiet desperation. Therefore, if your function is to attack apathy and get people to participate, it is necessary to attack the prevailing patterns of organized living in the community. The first step in community organization is community disorganization. The disruption of the present organization is the first step toward community organization. Present arrangements must be disorganized if they are to be displaced by new patterns that provide the opportunities and means for citizen participation. All change means disorganization of the old and organization of the new. Excuse me. This is why the organizer is immediately confronted with conflict. The organizer dedicated to changing the life of a particular community must first rub raw the resentments of the people of the community, fan the latent hostilities of many of the people to the point of overt expression. He must search out controversy and issues rather than avoid them, for unless there is controversy, people are not concerned enough to act. The use of the adjective controversial to qualify the word issue is a meaningless redundancy. There can be no such thing as a non controversial issue. When there is agreement, there is no issue. Issues only arise when there is disagreement or controversy. An organizer must stir up dissatisfaction and discontent, provide a channel into which the people can angrily pour their frustrations. He must create a mechanism that can drain off the underlying guilt for having accepted the previous situation for so long a time. Out of this mechanism, a new community organization arises, but more on this point later. And you can see how Barack Obama had used these like tactics to become president. Like, because he was like a career community organizer before going into Congress and then running for president. Like he was using all the organizer tactics of creating discontent in order to win the presidency. The job then is getting the people to move, to act, to participate. In short, to develop and harness the necessary power to effectively conflict with the prevailing patterns and change them. When those prominent in the status quo turn and label you an agitator, they are completely correct, for that is, in one word, your function, to agitate to the point of conflict. A sound analogy is to be found in the organization of trade unions. A competent union organizer approaches his objective, let's say the organization of a particular industrial plant where the workers are underpaid, suffering from discriminatory practices, and without job security. The workers accept these conditions as inevitable, and they express their demoralization by saying, "What's the use?" In private, they resent these circumstances, complain, talk about the futility of bucking the big shots, and generally succumb to frustration, all because of the lack of opportunity for effective action. Enter the labor organizer or the
May I
agitator.
interject?
Yes.
I think it's interesting that on the left, we have this discourse of the wage slave, wage slavery, and just in a broader narrative, the idea that like a job is enslavement, like you're enslaved
Right.
by your job. But
Yep.
then when corporations like lay off a bunch of people, that is seen as evil.
Yeah.
But really, well, didn't they just liberate those people? But oh no, the corp. This is the implicit claim that they never say this, but this is what they're basically saying is the corporation like owes you a job so you can survive. The corporation is like this parent at the same time that it's a slave master. No matter what it does, it's evil.
Well, because the whole point is for the people to take over the corporation and be at the same level as the management and the owners of that company, right? Like the argument from the left isn't that Amazon shouldn't exist. The argument from the left is that the warehouse workers should make as much as the CEO, which is absurd. It's like it's an insane argument. It's like what value are the warehouse workers bringing, and are they being paid the level of the value that they are delivering? And so that's what the question should be. Now, some places I could say, okay, probably don't pay up to par or up to snuff with the value that employees deserve. But for the most part, I mean, most places are pretty fair nowadays. I mean, if you want to blame anything for for wages being stagnant in some way, shape, or form, I would say that the minimum wage has a lot to do with that. Because if you look at countries that don't institute minimum wages, especially like in like Danish countries that don't institute minimum wage, their like average wage is like higher than the U.S. So maybe it's the way that we're incorporating the minimum wage laws. Who knows? I don't know what the problem is.
Definitely
Like
minimum wage is a problem. Monetary inflation,
inflation, yeah, that's a huge
100%.
issue, you know? So there's all kinds of problems that are going on in the US, but
Crushing
the
government
left
regulations
solution,
on businesses.
what the left solution always is to just throw money at the problem. Well, sometimes the problem is money's being thrown at the problem. Like and
Throw
they
someone else's money at the problem.
yeah, yeah, they want to throw Elon's money at the problem or whatever.
We could take all his money and then we could end poverty.
And then they realize, oh wait, his net worth isn't actually liquidated. We have to liquidate all that. And how do we do that? Well, then you get rid of all these companies that they love so much. Enter the labor organizer or the agitator. He begins his troublemaking by stirring up these angers, frustrations, and resentments, and highlighting specific issues or grievances that heighten controversy. He dramatizes the injustices by describing conditions at other industrial plants engaged in the same kind of work where the workers are far better off economically and have better working conditions, job security, health benefits, and pensions, as well as other advantages that had not even been thought of by the workers he is trying to organize. Just as important, he points out that the workers in the other places had also been exploited in the past and had existed under similar circumstances until they used their intelligence and energies to organize into a power instrument known as a trade union, with the result that they achieved all of these other benefits. Generally, this approach results in the formation of a new trade union. Let us examine what this labor organizer has done. He has taken a group of apathetic workers. He has fanned their resentments and hostilities by a number of means, including challenging contrasts of better conditions of other workers in similar industries. Most important, he has demonstrated that something can be done and that there is a concrete way of doing it that has already proven its effectiveness and success. That by organizing together as a trade union, they will have the power and the instrument with which to make these changes. He now has the workers participating in a trade union in supporting its program. We must never forget that so long as there is no opportunity or method to make changes, it is senseless to get people agitated or angry, leaving them no course of action except to blow their tops. That's like organizational blue ball. And so the labor organizer simultaneously breeds conflict and builds a power structure. The war between the trade union and management is resolved either through a strike or a negotiation. Either method involves the use of power, the economic power of the strike or the threat of it, which results in successful negotiations. No one can negotiate without the power to compel negotiation. This is the function of a community organizer. Anything otherwise is wishful non thinking. To attempt to operate on a goodwill rather than on a power basis would be to attempt something that the world has not yet experienced. In the beginning, the organizer's first job is to create the issues or problems. So the problems didn't exist when you got there, you had to create them. It sounds mad to say that a community such as a low income ghetto or even a middle class community has no issues per se. The reader may feel that this statement borders on lunacy, particularly with reference to low income communities. The simple fact is that in any community, regardless of how poor, people may have serious problems, but they do not have issues. They have a bad scene. An issue is something you can do something about. But as long as you feel powerless and unable to do anything about it, all you have is a bad scene. The people resign themselves to a rationalization. It's that kind of world. It's a crummy world. We didn't ask to come into it, but we are stuck with it, and all we can do is hope that something happens somewhere, somehow, sometime. This is what is usually taken as apathy, what we discussed earlier, that policy follows power. Through action, persuasion, and communication, the organizer makes it clear that organization will give them the power, the ability, the strength, the force to be able to do something about these particular problems. It is then that a bad scene begins to break up into specific issues because now the people can do something about it. What the organizer does is convert the plight into a problem. The question is whether they do it this way or that way, or whether they do all of it or part of it. But now you have issues. The organization is born out of the issues, and the issues are born out of the organization. They go together. They are concomitant, essential to each other. Organizations are built on issues that are specific, immediate, and realizable. Sorry. Organizations must be based on many issues. Organizations need action as an individual needs oxygen. The cessation of action brings death to the organization through factionalism and inaction, through dialogues and conferences that are actually a form of rigor mortis rather than life. It is impossible to maintain constant action on a single issue. A single issue is a fatal straitjacket that will stifle the life of an organization. Furthermore, a single issue drastically limits your appeal, where multiple issues would draw in the many potential members essential to the building of a broad, mass based organization. Each person has a hierarchy of desires or values. He may be sympathetic to your single issue, but not concerned enough about that particular one to work and fight for it. Many issues mean many members. Communities are not economic organizations like labor unions with specific economic issues. They are as complex as life itself. To organize a community, you must understand that in a highly mobile, urbanized society, the word community means community of interest, not physical community. The exceptions are ethnic ghettos where segregation has resulted in physical communities that coincide with their community of interest or during political campaigns, political districts that are based on geographical demarcations. People hunger for drama and adventure for a breath of life in a dreary, drab existence. One of a number of cartoons in my office shows two gum chewing stenographers who have just left the movies. One is talking to the other and says, "You know, Sadie, you know what the trouble with life is? There just ain't any background music." But it's more than that. It is a desperate search for personal identity, to let other people know that at least you are alive. Let's take a common case in the ghetto. A man is living in a slum tenant. Doesn't know anybody and nobody knows him. He doesn't care for anyone because no one cares for him. On the corner newsstand are newspapers with pictures of people like Mayor Daley and other people from a different world, a world that he doesn't know, a world that doesn't know that he is even alive.
In the ghetto, though, in the
Yeah.
ghetto, there usually is background music.
And is this the same Mayor Daley that threatened to shoot rioters?
When the looting starts, the shooting starts.
Yep. When the organizer approaches him, part of what begins to be communicated is that through the organization and its power, I don't know what the hell just happened there. Through the organization and its power, he will get his birth certificate for life. That he will become known, that things will change from the drabness of a life where all that changes is the calendar. This same man is a demonstration at City Hall, might find himself confronting the mayor and saying, Mr. Mayor, we have had it up to here and we are not going to take it anymore. Television cameramen put their microphones in front of him and ask, What is your name, sir? John Smith. There ain't nobody in the ghetto named John Smith. Nobody ever asked him about what his name was before. And then, what do you think about this, Mr. Smith? Nobody ever asked him what he thought about anything before. Suddenly, he's alive. This is part of the adventure. Part of what is so important to people in getting involved in organizational activities and what the organizer has to communicate to him. Not that every member will be giving his name on television, that's a bonus. But for once, because he is working together with a group, what he works for will mean something. Let us look at what is called process. Process tells us how, purpose tells us why. But in reality, it is academic to draw a line between them. They are part of a continuum. Process and purpose are so welded to each other that it is impossible to mark where one leaves off and the other begins, or which is which. The very process of democratic participation is for the purpose of organization rather than to rid the alleys of dirt. Process is really purpose. Through all this, the constant guiding star of the organizer is, in those words, the dignity of the individual. Working with this compass, he soon discovers many axioms of effective organization. If you respect the dignity of the individual you are working with, then his desires, not yours, his values, not yours, his way of working and fighting, not yours, his choice of leadership, not yours, his programs, not yours, are important and must be followed, except if his programs violate the high values of a free and open society. For example, take the question, what if the program of the local people offends the rights of other groups for reasons of color, religion, economic status, or politics? Should this program be accepted just because it is their program? The answer is categorically no. Always remember that the guiding star is the dignity of the individual. This is the purpose of the program. Obviously, any program that opposes people because of race, religion, creed, or economic status is the antithesis of the fundamental dignity of the individual. It is difficult for people to believe that you really respect their dignity. After all, they know very few people, including their own neighbors, who do. But it is equally difficult for you to surrender that little image of God created in our own likeness. Ooh, there you go, switching things up again, which lurks in all of
What?
us. Yeah. Yeah. It's like that there's a AI there's a book about AI I was reading a couple of years ago called Created in Our Image. It's all about giving AI like a consciousness. It's crazy.
Whoa.
Yeah. All right, where was I? But it is equally difficult for you to surrender that little image of God created in our own likeness, which lurks in all of us and tells us that we secretly believe that we know what's best for the people. A successful organizer has learned emotionally as well as intellectually to respect the dignity of the people with whom he is working. Thus, an effective organizational experience is as much an educational process for the organizer as it is for the people with whom he is working. They both must learn to respect the dignity of the individual, and they both must learn that in the last analysis, this is the basic purpose of organization, for participation is the heartbeat of the democratic way of life. We learn when we respect the dignity of the people that they cannot be denied the elementary right to participate fully in the solutions to their own problems. Self respect arises only out of people who play an active role in solving their own crisis and who are not helpless, passive, puppet like, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, sir, recipients of private or public services. To give action contributes nothing to the development of the individual. In the deepest sense, it is not giving, but taking their dignity. Denial of the opportunity for participation is the denial of human dignity and democracy. It will not work. In Reveille for Radicals, I remembered how to say that this time. It took me a second, but I remembered. In Reveille for Radicals, I described an incident in which the government of Mexico once decided to pay tribute to Mexican mothers. A proclamation was issued that every mother whose sewing machine was being held by the Monte de Piedad, the national pawn shop of Mexico. They have a national pawn shop? That's kind of cool. Should have their machine returned as a gift on Mother's Day. We have national banks. I want a national pawn shop.
That's a red flag. That's a national red flag right there.
Isn't that where you go to buy like former military vehicles and military weapons? You go to the national pawn shop. uh, there was tremendous joy over the occasion. Here was a gift being made outright without any participation on the part of the recipients. Inside of 3 weeks, the exact same number of sewing machines was back in the pawn shop. Another example occurred in a statement made by the United Nations delegate from Liberia, analyzing problems of Liberia. He noted that his nation had been deprived of the benefits of a previous history of colonialism. Press reaction was astonishment and ridicule, but the statement showed insight and wisdom. The people of Liberia had never been exploited by a colonial power, never been forced to band together at the risk of great personal sacrifice to revolt for freedom. They had been given freedom upon the establishment of their nation. Even freedom as a gift is deficient in dignity, hence the political sterility of Liberia. As Finley Peter Dunn's Mr. Dooley put it, don't ask for rights, take them, and don't let anyone give them to ye. A right that is handed to ye for nothing has something the matter with it. It's more thin likely it's only a wrong turned inside out. Okay, well, that's interesting grammar, spelling. I don't mean that's just so interesting what just happened there. The organization has to be used in every possible sense as an educational mechanism, but education is not propaganda. Real education is the means by which the membership will begin to make sense out of their relationship as individuals to the organization and to the world they live in, so that they can make informed and intelligent judgments. The stream of activities and programs of the organization provides a never ending series of specific issues and situations that create a rich field for the learning process. The concern and conflict about each specific issue leads to a speedily enlarging area of interest. Competent organizers should be sensitive to these opportunities. Without the learning process, the building of an organization becomes simply the substitution of one power group for another. All right, no more ghetto writing in this chapter. That was beautiful.
That's right. I'm John Smith.
Oh, yeah.
John Smith and the motherfucker.
Yeah. My name's Lamangelo.
Aquarius.
Yeah. That's lemon jello to you white folk, but my mom pronounced it Lamangelo. All right. So, all right. The next one is tactics. That's the long one. So it looks like on this, it's different recording than it is what I'm reading here. I've noticed that some of the chapters that we're reading are that are recorded as separate chapters are actually combined on in this writing.
Yes.
So next week's the long one. Next week's the real long one.
Oh yeah.
Y'all think I've been long-winded up to this point? Just wait until we get into tactics.
You ain't seen nothing yet, boy.
That ain't no lie. But all right, you got any ending remarks on this chapter?
It was a little less painful than I thought it was going to be, which is not a high endorsement. He did seem to be getting closer to like actionable advice. You know, He even
Yeah.
prompted you to bring up Obama using this to become president.
Yep.
Whereas before, it just seemed like a lot of like,
Sophistry.
yeah, redundant sophistry. But now he's getting more into like, how can you use this Saul Alinsky frame of reference to get power and be the president of the United States of America,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yep. Well, and
So
you
it's
got
getting
to,
good.
well, we got to realize too, like the political class of the late 90s and early 2000s were like the class of Alinsky. I mean, especially the Democrats, you know, many of them referred to Alinsky as being influential in their political, like, decision to join politics. So, so now that the class of Alinsky is retiring, we got the class of Trump, I guess, which is, I'd like to, I can't wait to see what comes next. Let's just put it that way. May you live in interesting times.
Indeed, we do.
All right. Well, I'm going to stop this recording here because I got to go eat. I am starving. I'm about to digest my stomach.